Pre-war New Zealand was considered to be the land of milk and honey. And with a booming economy came a labour shortage, and migrants were being encouraged by the government and employers to come and join the growing workforce.
From the 1960s particularly, the Pacific people were being recruited for the factories in New Zealand, and you had the phenomenon of the boat that came with the whole families, and it was a huge step to come from small rural atolls to the cities of New Zealand.
They could afford to bring all these people in to do all the dirty jobs of the factory work, the cleaning the hospitals, cleaning the factories, whatever.
Many migrants were staying on visitors' permits, and with jobs being so plentiful, immigration laws were not enforced. But when the economy took a turn for the worse, the Pacific Island community found themselves targeted in a campaign of arrest and deportation.
The reality is that when this economy was booming, for the sake of money, we waived the law. Now that we are experiencing a net migration loss, we are deciding to enforce it.
It traumatised the entire Pacific Island community because you had no way of knowing whether you were going to be the next house that was raided.
Welcome to the unofficial capital of Polynesia, Auckland. Of the 32,000 islanders who live in this country, an estimated 20,000 are concentrated in this one city, making it, in fact, the largest Polynesian city in the world. New Zealand has already more than 10% of the world's Polynesian population. From the magic of the South Seas, from the Europeans' dream of paradise, they come to New Zealand. Why?
Job opportunities, money, but I think mainly education for their children. Key to success.
And so, Pacific people left their homes in search of a better way of life and quickly adapted to their new country.
Fia ele esse o ingeio Samoa, New Zealand. New Zealand, ia au fofora e lo peisa e sa 140. Kala 50 le kula. Ia e malo sia la over la. Se mo la u se la mo kupule. Lo pei.
Ia me moniana sa e lo manatu o te o fia no foi New Zealand o mo se tongi sili atu me sa ufainga longa inei o mai tongi mo to ai lava al faso soanga ato foi malaina lo no fotu nei Samoa lo tinamo tua papine fai ele mato pino walu no so mato fale le anga fale sa mato no foi nei.
The life in R.I.P. is similar to New Zealand. The exception, of course, is that it's a bigger place in Auckland and other centres in New Zealand, and you earn more money here. But if you come from the village where you don't work and you don't earn, that is, I think, where there's quite a big difference of lifestyle when you come to New Zealand.
All of a sudden they found the extra discretionary dollar in their pocket, and some of that didn't go to the church or the family, it went to consumption of alcohol. And those bars, big beer barns, that basically were in those days were the place to go to. And for some, it didn't work out well. Abusing alcohol and street disorder and violence.
I was born in the city, I was raised in the street.
Many Pacific migrants settled in the inner city areas of Auckland and were faced with issues linked with poverty. In 1973, Britain turned from their colonies to the EEC for trade, and the post-war boom was over. The New Zealand economy that had been so strong was now struggling.
It's widely believed that we're in the middle of an oil squeeze and that it's been caused by the Arab countries cutting back their supplies of oil to New Zealand.
We'd had oil shock and New Zealand had its first wave of unemployment, something that had not occurred since the Depression. And the government of the day found it very easy, and a lot of support from Talkback Radio, which was just starting, to suggest that this was all the fault of the Pacific Islanders. Whoever's fault it was, it couldn't have been theirs, but they were an easy scapegoat.
Churches, employers had all welcomed these Pacific Islanders without residence permits to fill the factories and to fill the coffers of the churches. And suddenly these people who had been welcomed when it suited New Zealand found themselves in a position they were unwanted when it suited New Zealand.
There's these people from the Pacific Islands. I don't know if we can't absorb them, can we? What I mean, they're human the same as I am, but why not pour the money into them instead of bringing them here?
We're having trouble accepting the Polynesians fast enough, really. You know, we can't educate them. They're not used to our way of life. They don't know the language.
Well, I would say the good old British stock that we've all come from originally.
British people?
Yes.
Why that?
Because we all belong there. We came from there originally, all our grandparents and such like. Let's keep to our own British stock.
By 75, TV was becoming quite a big thing in terms of electoral campaigning, and the National Party went to an American firm, Hanna-Barbera, and got them to make some cartoons. One of those cartoons showed Cossacks dancing across the screen, and that was an anti-trade union appeal. And the second was they showed people who looked sort of Pacific Islander on the screen, and they said immigrants are taking New Zealanders' jobs and houses, and posed them as a threat.
There was a time when New Zealand cities were quiet and clean. People said they were nice places to bring up children. But the cities grew alarmingly. People poured in, not just from the country, but from other countries as well. 62,000 in just 2 years. Then one day, there weren't enough jobs either. The people became angry, and violence broke out, especially among those who had come from other places expecting great things.
It was obviously aimed at Pacific Islanders, to touch that racist nerve in New Zealand society, to say, do we want these people in the country? You know, the person who causes all the crime and rapes people and does all these bad things. And we thought, it's not us. There's nothing like us. And while there may be individuals like that, there were also white rapists and wife beaters and etc. But they weren't being singled out for being, in the same way.
I can recall the first time I ever saw those cartoons at a candidates meeting, and they showed us the cartoons. And I can recall sitting there saying, oh my God, that's going for the, ghoulies. And it was a campaign that went for the ghoulies.
And it was a campaign that worked. The National Party, under the leadership of Rob Muldoon, had swept to power with the largest majority in New Zealand history. They had campaigned hard on the issues of immigration and law and order. The police and the immigration department joined forces and began to crack down on overstayers.
We've been the only country, really, that hasn't done anything to stop them coming. We've allowed them to come here on visitors' permits, and we've done nothing about it. Well, we obviously can't run on like that. I mean, the Pacific Island countries that have been coming here, Tonga, the Cooks and Tokalaus and Niue, of course, have a right to come here, but from Tonga, from Samoa, from Fiji, if they were allowed to continue to come in that sort of way, well, all the other island nations, and there are lots of others in the Pacific, would say, well, you can go to New Zealand. It's the only country in the world you can go to, but you can go to New Zealand, and we've got to control our immigration. We can't let a flood come here and swamp us and swamp our economy.
The police didn't handle immigration issues. And what would happen is that the immigration department would have warrants for overstayers in particular, and they would seek the assistance of the police in the execution of those warrants. Now, very much was made of the word dawn raids. It's very emotive. Just remember, these young fellows were working in the freezing works, heading off to work at 5 and 6 in the morning. They were on long shifts and so on, and that was the only time you could get them.
The immigration officer comes to us, shows us the warrant with the photos of 2 or 3 people in one address. Then we organize a time that we will meet at the watch house and then go up to the address.
We're basically parked down the road, walk up to the house, cover the windows, cover all the exits, and we'll gain entry either through, normally somebody comes to the door.
I didn't even have an experience of what a dawn raid is until I heard the big bang on my door around about 1:30 in the morning. Then I heard it's noisier and louder, so I got up and went to the door and I opened the door. And I saw two policemen standing there with a dog.
Oh, I sort of got a fright because we don't get any strangers coming around this, late at night. And when I went to the door, it was these two cops that come in. The next minute, there was another two that come in.
Did they say what they wanted?
They only said that they wanted to see, how many people are living here, and if there's any overstayers. And I told him that there's only my uncle that lives here, and we're all sort of permanent here. And then he said that they wanted to come inside and have a look themselves. So they come inside, they found this other chap.
Ya ki ingo kom fai ke punga I fa fo mal fale le asu se awara ki sawai ya lo ko fo la yeri si le fai ko yo kom fai lo le ke punga ko pusa ku ya ke punga mal kai fa mala ngai lo a ko ngoro ke ko pusa ku ai fong wele mawa ya sab siring ia le ko luanga le anko le kamale solo kinga por amo solo le fale le se fe au ya fa mo ma ko le su ia sa maua maleanganga file mu ia nga avele o mako I fale ole ole.
With 3 police cars, 1 van and 1 police dog.
Pea ala le fite kia taranga maua koe ka polis.
Pero hana ulia to go algo ka police. Oftalum ka police.
Eke me passport.
When they arrived there, her landlady answered the door. And then when she found there were the police, and then she went and got her. And as soon as they saw her, they asked her for her passport.
When we opened the door, they just walked in and started asking questions. And everyone was really scared, but they were coming in, and we knew we had some of our families who were overstayers at the time. And, we were trying to talk to them. I was the only one there that could, but they were really rude and were just taken away. They said, no, they're coming with us.
Ia makuli lo I fafu. Ia o mga o leo leo. Ile ua whakakase ave ama ko le kaimi ale nga. Ave loa, ave ama ko le ingi meo nga o lava pi mako kingo. Ave lo mako le fale pui mo ko furo ka kamale me ngo fo inga I kong.
Raids were not only executed on homes at dawn. Police and immigration officers also turned up at factories to find overstayers.
No wal wailele falfainga oino. O falfainga luenga la lena mawaya. Ma au mayaile o te ila na wala tul palangi fen maya. O te saulu mayai tangata ye mana ya. Ena no sabali mayaile ai talan fen maya. Na de talal faitoa. Tula ya tua we el palangi la itua le tabale ya. Lokalo.
Senga. Sao phải ngà mu. Ile so fa mo fa pe la ho se me fa pe ke ula solia. Au fa ke ia ule wa ko. O ko ma lo ke wa mai au ko ngol fa ngà luenga. Ia la ko kala fa mai nga ma ko wol fe au. Ia la makunga nga o mo ke ko fe do e man ma ko ai.
Biased news reports and editorials linking Pacific people and crime fueled the public's fears. The police reacted by setting up a task force of specially trained officers to deal with inner-city crime.
Our role at that time was essentially dealing with large-scale policing, that's demonstrations, sports events, and also street violence and disorder. And in the mid-70s, the police had lost, to some extent, control of the streets, and it was a matter of regaining that.
Wherever there were Polynesians congregating in a place where there's likely to be disorder, the police would go along and mingle with them, and any minor offence, i.e. urinating in the street or swearing or, such like offences, then they get arrested.
The police had a very bad reputation. They were considered very racist. They were considered that they're not the friends of migrants. Yet I would well imagine that for certain white people, Pākehā people, they would have seen them as the protectors of their rights. Our people saw them as the thugs, the thuggery, the gang part of the machinery of racism. And so at that time, it wasn't a good relationship with the police in our communities.
I do believe that there was very bigoted attitude of some of my colleagues at the time, you know, for very minor offences, which I really believe they could have just been given a warning and sent home.
Oh, Chief, you just stand there for a minute, eh?
After the election in 1975, the police were given a larger role in dealing with overstayers, and they began a policy of random checks.
Black trousers, brown shoes.
The police proposed that they would simply stop people in the street and ask them for their documentation. Hello? What is this, South Africa? Pass laws? You've got to carry a passport to prove you're a Kiwi? I don't think they meant to be so offensive, but it was weird. And in defence, the then Minister of Police, Mr. McCready, when asked, but how do you know that the suspect is an overstayer? Mr. McCready, who was a dairy farmer by occupation, said, well, I can tell a Jersey from a Frisian. And I think that was the point at which it was really apparent that whether the individuals concerned meant to be racist or not, they were acting racistly.
Is it possible to give an assurance that the police won't stop people just because of the colour of their skin or because they look foreign and ask for proof that they're not overstayers?
This is not being confined, and I want to clarify this. Many people think this is because it is an all-out effort on Polynesians. The police role in this is to act on information, whether they be Polynesians or any other country, if they're overstaying. They have broken the law, the immigration law, as a lot of people have broken other laws. And if they break the law and there's a warrant out, the police's job then is to exercise that.
Does this indicate that there'll be greatly increased police action against overstayers?
Well, they will act on the warrants that are issued to them, as I do with anything else. And the situation that we want to arrive at is where we can get to a level with the immigrants. That's the problem that we're faced with. We've got too many of them.
To get to that level, are you going to have to step up action?
We have stepped it up. This is the start of it.
I do recall when we had the briefing that it was a Swiss message in those days. It wasn't a computer email. All it said was from the commissioner, I think it was Burnside at the time, and said you are to go, form a section, go to areas where the Polynesians congregate, question them as to their identity and bring them in for questioning. Some of us sort of discussed informally outside the police station, saying, "Geez, this is a very harsh sort of a treatment we're giving our brothers at the time."
The police are most certainly not happy with what they've been called upon to do. Rank and file reaction seems to be that they're being used politically. A long-serving police officer told me that to say that they are upset would be an understatement. The Police Association, that's the Man on the Beat's union, feel that they have been called upon to take all the bad press that should have gone to immigration. The greatest concern seems to be that all the goodwill that's been built up between the island communities and the police has been destroyed. Officially, the police are saying there is no blitz. They're not making random checks. They haven't got special squads. Police sources today tell me that is not correct. Police officers have been called off other inquiries to concentrate on this, what they consider to be a blitz. They have been told to concentrate on hotels and billiard halls frequented by islanders, and they are making random checks.
I think there was 5 of us in the sergeant. We went out to K Road and on a Thursday night, and that's when we sort of started questioning people, you know, as to their identity.
A lot of the young men, when the police came, they all went out, took out through the back, and then they all got rounded up. Then the police discovered all of them were, in fact, citizens, were meant to be here, and the police were looking a bit silly because at that time everyone's asking the question of, well, why are you rounding up Pacific Islanders? What justified cause have you got here? Well, the police then came up with that they all got charged because in their haste to get away from the police, they were still carrying the glass from the pub, so they got done for theft of property.
And there was a young islander whose name was Tailua, who was working shifts in a factory, I think in the Penrose area, and he was walking home after midnight one night, and he was stopped by two young policemen in a squad car who were doing a random check. He was quite a legitimate migrant, but in searching him they discovered he had two plastic combs in his pocket, and he worked in a factory which produced plastic combs. And when they questioned him, he agreed that he had in fact picked them up out of a rubbish tin. And you wouldn't believe it, he was charged with the theft of these plastic combs, which were only worth a few cents, and appeared in court the following day.
On some occasions we might have been a little bit overzealous, but only to the extent of actually asking people, look, what is your name? Have you got a passport? Where do you come from? In an attempt to execute the warrants that were held by the Immigration Department.
A policeman asked me whether I had my passport with me. And I said, well, I don't normally carry my passport with me. And I said, well, why are you asking for my passport? And he said, well, have you got any other form of identification? And I said, well, yeah, I have. I've got my university identification card. So I showed him that. And I said, are you looking for overstayers? And he said, oh, yeah. And I said, well, I was born in Mangakino, so you're not going to have much luck with me. But I went through, and I thought, the only reason why he stopped me is I was brown, I was wearing a floral shirt and a pair of gentles.
Contrary to public opinion, migration from the Pacific had been a drop in the ocean compared to that from other countries.
Statistics show that through the 70s and the 1980s that the bulk of overstayers in New Zealand were actually from Europe and from North America, but they weren't targeted to anything like the same extent. So basically you had something like 2/3 of the overstayers were Europeans, but 2/3 of those prosecuted were Pacific Islanders.
Stories of wrongful arrest and harsh police tactics were beginning to appear in the media, and there was a growing concern in the public, and especially from civil rights groups, that the Pacific people were being unfairly targeted.
I started university back in 1968, and students were becoming very interested in how New Zealand interacted with the wider world. So I was there as the opposition to the Vietnam War grew. There were student demonstrations on a large scale, so these were very interesting times.
We thought, like many of our generation, that New Zealand was the best country in the world for good race relations. And then once we got together and got caught up in one campaign after another, we realised there was a lot of hypocrisy about New Zealand's attitude to race relations. We might have thought we were good, but we weren't.
Auckland's Pacific Island in the city. A few years ago, these streets spawned gangs and so gang brawls as disillusioned youngsters fought amongst themselves, largely for the hell of it. Today, some of the gangs still exist. Others have lost their members to a different sort of organisation.
The Polynesian Panthers based themselves on the civil rights activist group in America, the Black Panthers.
Some of the young Pacific Island people who were at university and decided to copy or do a similar thing here because the issues seem to be the same. Racial issues, poverty issues.
We did recognise there are a lot of differences between us and the Afro-American people. And so we actually changed the name to the Polynesian Panther Movement so that we could become more relevant. A lot of us wore the berets as well. But, you know, you could imagine wearing a beret on top of a big afro. So you either had the beret or a big afro. And yeah, it made you distinctive wherever you went.
I think we needed to have that image to kind of draw people's attention to us, to take us seriously. And once they knew that we weren't a gang, and once they knew that we were doing positive things, then they started to kind of change their attitudes, and that's the reaction we were hoping to get.
We had to sort of spend a lot of our early time period trying to dispel the gang myth, so we ended up doing programs like taking elderly folks on bus trips and delivering community newspapers and all that kind of stuff, just to try and kill the image that we were not a gang.
Receiving this award, we're pleased, but in a very, very small way.
The Polynesian Panthers had their headquarters in Ponsonby, and the group was made up of people mostly under the age of 20. They organised community services such as homework groups, food programs, and prison visits. Their role was to stand up for the issues that face Polynesian people living in New Zealand.
generally speaking, you give me the impression that you think that Polynesians are being treated as second-class citizens. Is this how you feel?
Yeah, we're not getting a fair deal in this society. That's why we're talking about a revolution. We feel that we have to have a revolution to have a society that's catered for a multiracial society that we have in New Zealand.
Well, a lot of our elders were saying to us that we shouldn't be like this, you know, because it's un-Polynesian to speak up and challenge authority.
We had no parents, you know, who believed what we were doing was right. Even my mum, why you go fight for those Maori people for? Why you go fight the police for? I said, Mum, if I don't do it, you know, we all get bored. But, you know, our old people didn't understand that.
They'd even pick the cops' word over their own kids, you know, because their recognition of authority was always that the Palangi knew best. And so they were very respectful in that way. But us being New Zealand born, we could see through that. We knew that, hey, hang on, something's not right here.
Tingy and I, we were on the executive committee working out strategies to try and work out how we're going to stop this thing. And a lot of our members felt, you know, just go and bowl them over. Or set up resistance groups that when they come into Dawn Raid, you know, just smack the cops. But we felt it was a long-term thing, and it would be, you know, it wasn't the kind of action that we needed because it was so high profile. So we decided to Dawn Raid the ministers.
Well, we all went out. Howick was where he stayed, and we surrounded his house from maybe 2 sides on the road, turned our spotlight on, used the loud hailers. Mr. Birch, wake up, come and show us your passports. You know, we kept on going for about a full 2, 3, 4 minutes. As soon as we saw the lights coming on, then we jumped in the cars and took off.
I was in a group, there was 3 squads, and we've learnt from our street methods that you don't stay around at a crime scene. But unfortunately, I was in the squad where we Dawn raided, unfortunately, a young couple who looked like they were just making love. We actually were told by our intelligence service that they were in unit, Honourable Gear was in Unit 1, apparently he was in Unit 3. So, but we found that the other squads were successful in the extent that, you know, we had a Minister of Immigration at that time called Air Commodore Gould, who felt that the New Zealanders were kith and kin to the racist South Africans. You know, so we decided to Dawn raid him. When he was interviewed on radio, he said, how dare these people come into it at such an ungodly hour? And the radio announcer sort of said, well, surely that's what they're complaining about.
Every parent's worst nightmare.
You know, he came from the islands. He was over here for, like, you know, on those 3-month visas and that. And what happened was, it's sort of like he overstayed his time here, and the police came and they, you know, they raided our house and they took him away, and sort of like that's what happened, you know. And I didn't know what it was in those days. It wasn't until, like, I grew up and sort of realized, you know, this is that period of our life, you know. It happened. It was like and they had a name for it. They called it the Dawn Raid days.
An element of fear and concern grew amongst the Pacific Island community. Regardless of immigration status, many were worried they'd be targeted next.
Because the first wave of immigrants that come to any new country are kind of invited there and feel like they're beholden to their hosts, and especially Pacific Islanders, you know, it's like, you know, you're in someone's house, you don't make a mess, you don't make a fuss. And so the thing is with any first wave is to keep your heads down, your ass up, and just keep working. Don't make a fuss. And so when a lot of it was happening, the community was quite divided. One half was like, well, these people are ruining it for everybody, you know.
All the families who were well established then in New Zealand have this feeling, we agree that we must help with the overstayers to encourage them to go back to the immigration and reapply, because we did not want the name of Samoa to be damaged by our own people breaking the law.
Well, I think in some ways too, our own people sort of reported on some of the other people. As long as, you know, they keep within the Palangi's way of life, you know, they keep reporting our own people back to the Palangis. And that's when the Dawn Raids, you know exactly where to go. Because some families told on other families.
my colleagues up at the operations room would refer these calls to me. Hey, it's one of your cousins up here, and I said, hello. And they said, oh, I want to report an overstayer. And then immediately I sort of tried to work out whether they were Tongan or Samoan. And I said, so I ended up talking in Samoan to them, and I said, well, why do you want to report your cousin or your brother or someone, you know? She said, oh, I'm just getting sick of him coming home drunk, or, you know, oh, he's not sending money back home. And it's just, you know, demeanors like that.
In their enthusiasm to identify overstayers, the police and the immigration service had some difficulties. They essentially targeted anybody who was brown and looked vaguely Pacific Islander. And of course, Niueans, Tokelauans and Cook Islanders were New Zealand citizens and should never have been put in the same category as Samoans and Tongans. But the police got very confused and would quite often target the wrong person from the wrong community, from the wrong country.
Maori people were also stopped in the street and said, where you from? What island? The North Island. Oh.
I opened the door and there were two policemen, and I could see off from their face that they thought this wasn't a good idea, and one of them sort of said to me, would I identify myself? And I said, I'm Richard Preble. And I remember the other policeman saying to me, and this isn't our day. And I said, what's going on? And they said, oh, well, we've got information that this house is that there are overstayers living at this house. And I said, well, no, you're mistaken. And they were very polite and left. But of course, if they hadn't recognised me, say my wife was from Fiji, if she'd answered, I don't know what that knock on the door would have been like.
It was easy for police to make mistakes when working from inconclusive information, often based on the colour of people's skin.
I tramped on your walk, sorry.
So they were targeting mainly Polynesian areas, and our feeling was, why don't you go to Remuera, RSA, or these other places where Europeans are? No, they chose, so they were targeting us, so we targeted them back.
All the Panthers and the People's Union and CARE and other groups got together and followed these convoys of paddy wagons.
Breaking all the wheels on the freeway, shopping around downtown all day, found a way to make a real deal on a wheel.
We actually named the group the Pig Patrol, as opposed to their task force. You know, it was a police investigation group.
Pig patrols were basically made up of squads that were following the task force. We would pick them up from Central Police Station.
As soon as the patrols noticed a car that was following, they were likely to stop it and give it a fine-tooth combing over. And if there was anything out of order, and particularly if it had a brown driver, they were likely to land a ticket for something.
A good example was a Māori guy came out of the glue pot once and said, hey, whakarongo mai. He got picked up for swearing. You know, but basically he was just sort of saying, hey, listen to us. And so, fortunate enough, and on that particular squad, we had a Pākehā lady who actually was familiar with Te Reo.
We had at least 3 or 4 cars mobile, ready to go, and just followed them around. And we went to every pub they stopped at, took photos, hung around.
A lot of our actions was trying to make sure that the police weren't being specifically racist, being discriminatory, and also being heavy.
And some of the policing was very provocative. A certain amount of pushing and shoving, and if you shoved back, that was it.
When they arrived at a particular venue, we would go and distribute leaflets about people's civil rights when confronted by police, and encourage people not to be provoked.
And they got upset about it because a lot of the kids that they were picking on before, these kids now were saying, well, am I under arrest? And, you know, that kind of stuff. What's your number, officer? And just basic rights. And they tried to tell us that we were actually misinforming the public. So I sort of suggested to the members of police that they go and arrest the author. And when they found out that the author was David Longley, they stopped.
Now, why the random searches now?
No, it's not a random search, actually. The police are acting on information that's been given to them
from the Immigration Department. In some cases, information has been laid to the court and there is a warrant, a court warrant out.
In all the cases then yesterday, there would have been court warrants for these people?
Well, either court warrants or information laid by the Immigration Department.
The police were saying there were no random checks, and the Minister of Police was saying there were no random checks. And so I and a few others went to the news media and said, like the Star at that time, New Zealand Herald, and said, you know, there are random checks going on, and we've been subject to them.
The Auckland Star at that stage was, I guess you could describe it as a very liberal, Muldoon would have regarded as a rather left-wing publication, and we did have a particular characteristic in the newsroom that we sought out stories, particularly stories of social significance, and we saw this as one. And we began highlighting the fact that these dawn raids were going on, that people were being stopped in the street. We had published the first of these stories, and obviously there were leading questions put to Muldoon at his press conference, and he reacted in typical fashion and made it very clear that he thought that it was just a typical media beat-up, in particular a typical Auckland Star beat-up.
Can we take it then that checks on the streets will continue on the same basis as those made last week?
These are normal police checks and are not related to the Immigration Act.
Were there in fact no checks made on the street last week connected solely with the Immigration Act?
That's what I take from the Commissioner's report. And I think you might agree that there has been an absence of hard facts on which to base criticism. And as for hard facts of complaints by individuals who've been accosted on the street, I've yet to see the first one.
He challenged the Auckland Star to produce his evidence. Let them wheel in their evidence, he said. And by 6 o'clock that night, I had the first 6 signed affidavits air freighted to him in Wellington, and he had to accept that the denials were not going to carry any weight. That, in fact, there were people who were flagrantly lying about it, because we knew, for instance, that there had been a series of police conferences in which the policy had been worked out and the techniques and patterns of the whole process had been worked through. It wasn't just a random thing, it was something which had been planned. Finally, the weight of complaints and the weight of evidence which we published and which other news media picked up was such that the government couldn't avoid it. And so they set up an internal inquiry. And that was the stage where they discovered that, in fact, there'd been something like 201, I think, was the official figure.
Amid the growing public outrage over police action and political policies, the government was forced to acknowledge that the way that handled immigration laws had been a mistake. In 1977, the Immigration Department changed their procedures on handling overstayers, so these events would never be repeated.
I think there were a lot of simple, well-intentioned, honest, old-fashioned Kiwis in the police, in the immigration service, in politics, who thought they were, quote, doing their job, close quote. And they didn't mean to be racist, they didn't mean to be nasty, but the fact remains it came out that way for those that were on the other end.
New Zealand loved telling the world for over 20 years, straight after the war, that we were the most multicultural society, that we were, best at treating coloured people, and that we had a relationship. It didn't. It was still only in the beginning of really becoming a nation that understood what it meant to deal with all peoples that were coming to this nation.
The dawn raids were shameful because, in essence, they set out to pick up anybody who didn't look like a Pākehā or Palangi New Zealander. They swooped on people who were Māori. They swooped on many Pacifica people who had absolutely lawful residence in New Zealand, may even have been born here. So it brought a sense of great division that if you didn't look like the majority of New Zealanders, you ran the risk that you might be apprehended, brought to notice, questioned. It wasn't a good feeling.
When Pacific Underground talked about doing a play based on the dawn raids, it was kind of a mixed response. Some people were like, yeah, cool, finally. And, kids were like, wow, what's that? And some people were like, oh, no, best to, that's all over. That's all gone. And I remember I went to my mum And I asked her, that was the first person I asked, you know, my parents. And I said, before I talk to any academics, policemen, former victims, whatever, I said to my folks, tell me about the Dawn Raids. And Mum said, you know, gave me the beatbox. You know, as in, no, son, we don't talk about that. That's history. That's all gone. You know, so Islanders don't like to talk about their dirty laundry, you know, especially if it's already happened. It's like, well, what happened in the past is best left in the past.
Some of that trauma has stayed with people to this day. And amongst Pacific Island people, older Pacific Island people who were there and experienced that, or who's experienced it through family members or church members and so on, they're still often pretty reluctant to talk about it. What's changed is that a younger generation of people, either children at the time or born here since, have sort of recaptured that concept of the Dawn Raids and made it a bit of a brand.
Holla! Dawn Raid hip-hop, 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 hip-hop. Dawn Raid hip-hop represent. Holla!
My uncle that did go through it, you know, he's a pastor of a church in New Zealand now. And one day he came here and they recorded, he goes, D, I want to record my church album. And I was like, okay, come on, you know, can't stop family. So they came in, and then one day we just sat in here, and I was like, you know, going, oh, that's a nice name of your company, you know, you see it everywhere. And I said to him, oh, you know what it means, eh? And then he was like, nah, you know. So I had to explain to him, well, you remember that time you got locked up and Dad had to go to High Court and get you out? Well, you know, that's the meaning of that, you know. That was called a Dawn Raid. You got Dawn Raided on it. He was like, and he just laughed, eh? Because, you know, he's like, wow, you know, yeah, I remember that.
For those Pacific people that were affected by the Dawn Raids, it is a bitter era that cannot be forgotten. Life carries on, but with the knowledge that there has been an opportunity lost.
Saya ya la ufa no no ho le le tendo la to sawai wa o fia no hotel New Zealand o by the life in New Zealand to man nei la va yo tele el tupe tele le se me wol pio nei au piwa be foi le me le pia le tau si mai en tina ma tu fine le fa muliatu matuai pio me ton wala sa ya la lo mana tu foi le o tele fi sau pi o mana wa no fo yo fo le mamma pe le o langa fo ya yo al vai termina pi o la ta fa wa le o langa fo 5 le i foi se ai no me pena ya pe te ya ne la ya wa ma wa au mai ya o le ya se si me to tipo mai lo au ya sau lo le to ya me se si me asa mana o te no fo mau fia no fo mau lo ni sila mana ya no sila.